Kia ora and welcome to the very first episode of It's All About the Comms, the new podcast from the Public Relations Institute of New Zealand. This is where we share the real stories, big ideas and conversations with the people shaping the way Aotearoa communicates. Each episode, we'll talk to journalists, PR leaders, and storytellers who know how powerful communications can be. But for our very first episode, we're joined by someone who has lived and breathed some of the biggest global stories over the past few years. Award-winning journalist and now senior journalist for 3 News at 6, Lisette Reymer. You'll know Lisette from her time as Newshub's European correspondent, reporting a lot of the time from Ukraine, covering the death of Queen Elizabeth, the Israel-Gaza war, Donald Trump's indictment, and so much more. She's also recently published a really amazing book, and we're going to talk about that later. And the book's called No, I Don't Get Paid, Danger Money, Confessions of an Accidental War Correspondent. Lisette, welcome. It's such a privilege to have you as our very first guest.
I know, it's high pressure. Hopefully I'm a fitting first guest.
You very much are. So thank you for joining us today. So I want to go back to the early days. I've read your book. I absolutely loved it. And I'm not just saying that. I thought it was such a really, not just a riveting read, but it had real warmth and genuine personality. And it was incredibly authentic. Mm-hmm. And you talk about your early days of growing up on a Waikato dairy farm and then going through to journalism school and then later on in your career, going to some of the most dangerous places in the world. But what I'm interested in is learning about, what pulled you into the world of journalism.
Yeah, it's funny because I can't remember deciding to become a journalist. It was always just what was going to be for me. It was just always written in the stars, so to speak. I think my brother, who's 10 years older than me, he's the oldest and I'm the youngest in our family, he went to broadcasting school. So he was, 17, 18 doing that, and I was 7-ish, 8. So I think he almost inspired me probably without me realising it, because there is obviously a connection there that I saw him going to this cool school and learning all of this cool stuff about how to make the news. He was more behind the scenes, but I think I was definitely inspired by that. But news in general, and the 6 p.m. news in particular, was such an important part of our day at home in the house. And it was pretty much the only time we were allowed to watch television, and my parents never wanted to miss it. Even my grandparents were obsessed with the 6 p.m. news. So I'm sure that influenced my thinking and made me think, oh, I'd love to be involved in that. But I also just love telling a yarn.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, is the art of a great journalist is telling a story with simplicity, but also with telling it through an authentic voice. What was the steepest learning curve of when you departed New Zealand and you ended up in London? What was that? What were the sort of those key learning moments of arriving in that massive city and the bright lights of London?
I think the first thing probably happened in Tokyo. I stopped over at the Olympics. We covered the Olympic Games in Tokyo on our way to moving to London. And so that was kind of my first big assignment as the newly appointed Europe correspondent. And the first week of it went terribly. I had crazy heat stroke, was like dying on air pretty much. Like I was sweating profusely, almost fainted in one live cross. I lost my voice. I got taken off air because the bosses were like, you sound like you've got COVID. It was in the middle of the pandemic, so everyone was stressed. I'd get people messaging me saying, you've got the virus, you shouldn't be on air. So I got stood down and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm choking. And I knew all of the people who had gone for the job and didn't get it. And I had huge imposter syndrome of why on earth did I get this job? And now I'm screwing up the first assignment, and everyone at home will be thinking, what a disaster, they've chosen the wrong person. And so that was a massive learning curve in terms of I was pretty much having a panic attack for the whole first week of the Olympics. And then I really had to learn to, first of all, get that under control, but actually find some belief in myself that I was up to the job, that I could do it, and that I could recover and then deliver. And the next 2 weeks of the Olympics, I got through, I was back on air, but I look back at them now, those live crosses, and you can almost see a boa constrictor around my neck, I'm so stressed on TV. And yeah, it was super confronting. And I think the fact that I did survive the coverage gave me a bit of confidence. And then when I got to London, I really tried to just almost trick myself into believing I was up to it.
There's some great pictures in the book of you being in Tokyo, and you discovered these portable fans.
Yeah, they were my best friends. I had an umbrella to protect from the heat and a fan. But I had the most amazing camera operator, John Fleming. I had no makeup on by the end of each day. I sweated off. It was disgusting. And he would still manage to make me look presentable for I don't know what sort of magician work he was doing with that camera lens, but I would look, semi-presentable. But off air, I looked actually like a drowned rat. I was so sweaty and hot, and I was a mess. I was a total mess. And then I'd try and talk on TV. It was a disaster every time. But we made it through. I
guess, though, looking back, those early experiences helped you prepare for some of the big events that you were going to be reporting on later on, later on. I think the topics that we ended up covering and the stories we ended up covering in Europe, and specifically Ukraine, because that was the first really big thing that happened in my time over there, they were so massive and so unfathomable that I didn't have time to get in my own head. And I didn't even have time to put up the journalist bravado or the oh, yep, I've got my blazer on, I'm a proper grown up reporter, I'm going to talk properly and I'm going to present properly. I didn't have time to think of anything like that because the topic was so overwhelming in terms of you're just meeting people on their very worst days. You're not trying to be anything. It's a very human connection that you're having with those people. And then you're just trying to tell their story. You're not building it up into anything. You're not trying to present it properly. You're just you're just delivering what you're hearing, which is so not about you, that you're not in your head because you're not this isn't my moment. This is this huge story that I just happen to be responsible to share. I just was never in my head about it because I didn't have time to be, or it wasn't about me at all. I mean, you go from reporting in New Zealand, you get via Tokyo, you get to London, and then suddenly you're in Ukraine, you're covering the Queen's death, all the drama around Donald Trump and the mischief that he was getting up to. Out of all those, I mean, they're massive, massive stories, aren't they? Which one do you think tested you the most? Which was the most challenging? Because one of the things that reading your book is that you don't have much time to prep. Yeah. Often you will get a call from the newsroom and you basically just have hours, if that, to go and get from one place to the other and prepare yourself.
Yeah, it's really hard because they're all challenging for such different reasons. The Turkey earthquake, getting there was also a huge part of our job was the logistics rather than actually, I used to say, the stuff that you see at 6 p.m. is the easy part, the actual talking to camera, that's easy. It's getting to that location as quickly as possible. It's booking all the flights, all the accommodation, getting the visas right, making sure the camera has its visa sorted. It's called a carnet. It's just this arduous paperwork you have to sort for all all
You
the
learn
different...
a lot about the carnet in the book.
Totally, but it's such a big part of the job. And have we got enough bags? And do we have a car? How are we going to get from A to B once we arrive? Is the airspace open? Oh no, we can't fly into Tel Aviv anymore because the missiles are going. So we'll fly to Jordan instead, get a car, drive the border. There's so many logistical things that you're dealing with. In Turkey, there was no electricity. Where are we going to sleep? How are we going to power the laptop? Do we have cash? Our credit cards aren't going to work, so we need to go and withdraw thousands and thousands of dollars of cash and then transfer that money from Ukrainian dollars to Polish dollars or vice versa. There's so many other things going on in your head, SIM cards, time zones, that often is the most challenging part, actually getting to the location. And Turkey was like that for us. We had massive budget issues. We were negotiating with the bosses. Do we go cover Ukraine for the first year anniversary, or do we cover the Turkey earthquake, which went on to claim the lives of 50,000 people plus in the end? So it was a massive story. So you're having those sorts of conversations with the bosses on the other side of the world. That was really challenging because we knew we really wanted to get there. We needed a car to sleep in because the accommodation wasn't going to be stable because of the aftershocks. We needed, electricity was a big thing. Hygiene was a big thing because none of the bathrooms or water was running. That was logistically really tough. But then obviously, even covering Trump's indictment's tricky because it's impossible to interview Trump supporters. They are like no other people I've ever interviewed. But then obviously Ukraine and Israel are stories that are emotionally, but so is Turkey and Syria, emotionally devastating. And they take a lot out of
as
you.
a journalist, when you're out there, interviewing people who, they've lost loved ones, their homes have been destroyed. How do you manage to detach yourself and not get drawn into the whole emotion? Because there must be a natural instinct to comfort someone who's lost loved ones and what have you.
Yeah, I think there's two parts of it. One is you are on a mission and you're so busy throughout the day and you've got no time to stop and think that you don't have time to fully process what you're dealing with. You're really, I can't stress how busy you are from 3 a.m. through till 1 a.m. and then you have 2 hours where you might get to put your head down on a pillow, but then probably an air raid siren goes and you're running down to a bomb shelter and trying to sleep down there. So your days are so hectic and you're trying to make sure you've got everything done for New Zealand and getting your package sorted as well as the various live crosses throughout the day, that you are really on a mission. And I think that protects you a lot. And then the other part of it is I never tried to stop myself from feeling. And I just very naturally, there would be interviews where I would cry. And maybe that's not textbook journalist school advice, but that worked for me because if someone's telling me about the hardest day of their life, how awful to be staring at a blank face in return that is showing no compassion and no... When I did have that compassion, so why would I hide it? Why would I look at someone and try and pretend that what they were telling me wasn't bothering me? Of course it was. So I think sometimes that also helps to build trust and just a mutual respect between a journalist and the people you're talking to as well. Yeah, because if they can be so vulnerable with me, why would I pretend that I was some sort of staunch journo?
So with the book, I having read it, and it's an amazing read, and I really recommend people get hold of it. I loved it. The title, tell us about the title.
Yeah, it was just the number one. Everyone would ask me, it was the only thing. There were two things people asked me. What does your mum think? And do you get danger money? Those were the two questions I was constantly asked. And so I was like, well, let's just deal with that off the bat. Let's just call it, no, I don't get danger money. And then people won't need to die wondering anymore.
Some of the lighter moments in the book capture the day-to-day practical realities of reporting. And you mentioned them quite a few times. You've mentioned about the just being on the go constantly and the lack of sleep, but also trying to find something to eat is really, really difficult. And one thing that jumped out at me a few times was when you're in Ukraine was the lack of choice and often resorting to eating Ukrainian hot dogs.
Yeah. No.
Could you eat another hot dog?
You know what? Like the other day I was talking about them and I described them as disgusting. And then I thought, what? Were they just like, I've kind of morphed now, but I was eating them all the time and I used to love them. But now I'm like, I don't know if I would want another one of those in my lifetime. But they are quite unique. They're like a bread roll that they hollow out and then they cut off the top and then they put the hot dog to sit inside the bun and then they put underneath it like tomato sauce, mayonnaise, mustard, whatever sauces you want. So it becomes this, it's very unusual, and then they toast it. But it is, at the time we thought they were amazing, but it was pretty much the only hot food we would get a lot of the time. The electricity was down and we'd try and eat some cold soup, like beetroot soup is their like big, national specialty, and we couldn't even heat it up. It was not the one. It was not the one for me. So I would go for these hot dogs that they sell at pretty much every petrol station, which again, a lot of the time are the only places, one, you're stopping because you need to get petrol, and two, the ones that are open and operating. So we ate a lot of hot dogs. We ate a lot of Pringles. Yeah, we weren't living healthy lives. Like it was really bad food and no sleep and a lot of adrenaline.
You also mention a few times in the book about just before you're doing the live cross is trying to look presentable. Do you think women
trying to emphasis on trying to?
Do you think women are under a lot more scrutiny than, say, a man who's reporting and he can look quite scruffy and what have you? Do you think women are under a different level of scrutiny?
Yeah, I think on lots of levels they are, but I never felt that in my reporting over there because I think everyone could appreciate I wasn't going to be looking like some glam, studio lit journalist in those environments. And I didn't care. Like my idea of looking presentable was to put a beanie on so that my hair didn't look quite as bad. But I would never usually wear a beanie on screen. Like that would never have happened before I was over there. But that was my this will be good. I'll put a beanie on and then I'll look tidy. So because I couldn't straighten my hair or curl my hair, I don't have hair straighteners. I mean, it's all so trivial and stupid in the scheme of what you're reporting. I was doing my makeup in the reflection of like a kettle in a bomb shelter one morning. I mean, at that point, you're not really putting on makeup. You're kind of just splash, dash and hoping for the best. But it's just, it's not a priority. And I never, ever had anyone say, could you tidy yourself up? Like you're looking a little bit. Although I did worry about when the Queen died, I was always really worried about my black blazer that you have to wear when the Queen dies. You had to wear black on screen. And I was always really, really stressed about my black blazer having marks on it. And I didn't want it to look dirty or smudged or stained when the moment finally came that she'd passed away and I had to talk about it on TV. I wanted to look tidy on that occasion.
You talk about the logistics of reporting in sort of war zones. I think for a lot of people, they don't realise that actually it's not just you and the cameraman. There's actually a whole team. There's actually you've got to go in with a security detail, don't you?
Yeah.
And in the book, you talk about all some of the characters that you met along the way who were there to provide, who were there to basically make sure that you were going to be safe. Can you talk us through some of those characters that you met, because they are quite interesting?
Yeah, well, those guys were pretty much my reason for writing the book, or a huge motivation, because they were just phenomenal characters. They seemed almost fictional and just so far from the world that most Kiwis live in, when you're talking about people who have served in the SAS for 15 years or Special Forces for 15 years, I should say, or, they go out on boats and defend against pirates. That's their their day job, or they go and buy gold in Africa for rich people in England. These are jobs I didn't even know existed. But yeah, we would hire security teams whenever we'd go into Ukraine, although actually not when we did a few trips without security when it felt safe enough, or we wanted to keep the budgets down. We'd just go in by ourselves. So sometimes it was just Daniel and I, or Alex and I. But when we, like, for example, when we went to the front line, of course, you're going to need some support on the ground. You can't be going into those environments by yourself with the amount of experience we had. It would just be crazy. And I think my mum would have a heart attack. So yeah, we had, on those occasions, you have a couple security officers. You'd have a fixer who's kind of a local producer. Essentially, they can speak the language, they know the culture better, they just help keep you safe. They have good contacts in the area as well, so they can help organise interviews for you. And then we'd have drivers, so people that would drive the vehicles. And a lot of the time we were in armoured vehicles when we'd go to the front line, because obviously you're worried about everything at that point. So yeah, big teams, but most of them would have military experience. In fact, all of them did. And some of them were from Ukraine. And then when the war started, a lot of the Ukrainians obviously were called to serve. And so then they were unavailable for us to work with. But a lot of them were like straight out of James Bond movies, just, yeah, surreal.
I mean, you talk about, there's one chap who stood out, and he sounded, he was a kind of a James Bond character.
Yeah, the first guy that we worked with, who was a Ukrainian, he was proper James Bond, like the James Bond, the closest I've ever met. He was in a suit. He had this like really suave vibe about him. He had a Louis Vuitton bag slung over his shoulder. He would never let us take photos of him. Like, he would say, "Oh, my wife didn't even get photos on my wedding day." Like, he was completely anonymous and all secretive, very mysterious. Yeah, I felt like deeply in love for pretty much every single security officer we worked with. Daniel, the camera operator, would have to be like, he'd roll his eyes and be like, "Okay, can you stop trying to flirt with the security officers?" But they were quite amazing. And that James Bond guy had it took us days for him to reveal it, but he was always carrying a pistol in his Louis Vuitton bag. And we were like, what? Like, this was before the war started. So we had not seen guns. We were not used to this world. And he was like, well, no one's going to know that I've got a gun in a Louis Vuitton bag. He was like, it's a perfect place to conceal it. And I was just like, what is this world? We tried to work with him when we went back in once the war had started. And we sent him a message saying, can we, would you mind looking after us again? We really enjoyed your support last time. And he replied and said he was unavailable. And I think his words were, I've been hunting in the Kiev area, having good results already, which he was talking about hunting the Russians, and the war had started and he'd gone to fight. Yeah. And he was like, having good results already. Like, the way they think and the way they talk, crazy. So far from New Zealand.
I mean, there's lots and lots of scary moments in the book because, I mean, as we speak, Ukraine is still under attack.
Totally.
And it's getting daily bombings. I mean, the whole situation is still pretty horrendous. Was there one particular really scary moment? Because you talk about going to areas where there's landmines. You constantly talk about being woken up in the middle of the night with sirens going off. Is there one takeout moment which you thought, oh my God, you really did fear for your life?
It's interesting because I think there are different kind of moments. Like, there was one time where I thought I'd walked over a landmine and then I thought someone had kicked it. And, well, he did kick it, but it was a booby trap. But at that point, I thought it was real, and I had that whole jump on Dan, try and save our lives and life before your eyes type. It was so fast, but it it very quickly revealed that it was this fake landmine that the Ukrainians who'd returned to the village had placed there to deter the Russians from returning. So it didn't explode, and that was a very short-lived but very frightening moment, whereas there were other things that happened which were, I possibly wasn't fearing for my life, but they were terrifying for a long time. There was one day I was woken up banging on the door, and I thought I'd slept through an air raid siren, and I went to the door and opened it, and there was a guy there who I'd never seen before, and he was yelling at me in Ukrainian, and obviously I couldn't understand what he was saying, but it didn't matter because the whole stairwell of the whole corridor of our hotel was on fire, and I was like, well, we've been bombed. And there was just fire everywhere. I got shoved to the ground, and they put this wet white cloth over my face and told me to obviously were telling me to get out. And as I was going down the stairwell to get out of this high rise, there were just all these Ukrainian military coming through and all these guns. And I just, I don't know if I thought I was going to die, but I was definitely terrified for a long time as I got outside and didn't know what was happening, couldn't find anyone. All of our team was missing. And in the end, it actually transpired that the guy that had been staying opposite me in the hotel on the room opposite was an alcoholic, and there's no alcohol in Ukraine during the war. And he had been having hallucinations, and he had lit the whole place on fire, and the hotel opposite had seen the fire burst out through the window of my floor, and so called the emergency services. So we hadn't been bombed, but that's for a long time. I felt probably half an hour I was so just terrified and couldn't find anyone, and it was just a very, very horrific experience. But yeah, it's not quite the same as that, oh my God, I'm going to die moment of like a landmine being hit. There were lots of moments like that.
I can imagine. You've spent a lot of time in Ukraine over the last few years, and like I say, it's still in the news. They're still at war, and you've got a close connection with the country and the people. Do you think they're going to be able to defeat Russia? And how long do you think it's going to take? I know this is like some type of like magical question, but I'm just, you've got a really, really good insight. And you've obviously talked to lots of politicians, you've talked to soldiers, you've talked to generals, you've talked to ordinary people. Now that it looks like there's peace in the Middle East, do you think the focus will now turn to Ukraine, and Mr. Trump will start to get a bit more firmer with the Russians?
Well, I think Trump has been trying to sort it out, and obviously he said he was going to do it within 24 hours, and then I think it probably proved a little trickier than he had imagined, and so then he's turned his focus to something else and got a win elsewhere that he can talk about. But look, if I knew how to fix it, I would be telling someone else who could actually do something about it. It's such a massive and very, very complicated situation. The far east of Ukraine, what makes it so tricky is that land, and we met them, there are a lot of Russian sympathizers living in that far east area. There are people who grew up in the Soviet Union, had a house in Ukraine, but they call themselves Russian nationals but Ukrainian citizens, which means that area of land in the far, far east is always going to be very contentious, regardless of what sort of deal is done. At the moment, Russia occupies far more than that, about a fifth of the country, which is significant. And now Trump's saying that he wants to get all the land back for Ukraine, which would be unbelievable, especially if it includes Crimea in the bottom of the south. But I think that area in the very far east is always going to be highly contentious because of the history there and the amount of people that feel like they're Russian and feel like that land was taken from the Russians or it should be Russian, and then vice versa. Obviously, the Ukrainians who are staunchly independent and want to protect that independence. So it's such a tricky one. The Ukrainian resilience is there still. They're very defiant, and especially anything east of Kiev, I feel like people are still very invested and staunchly for continuing the fight, but I think the further west you get, people are trying to move on with their lives and resume some sort of normalcy, and people are sick of, or it's getting harder to say goodbye to their loved ones, knowing that this war doesn't have a really soon end date. The initial start of the war, a lot of people thought, yep, let's go fight, get this over with in a couple of weeks or even a few months. Now it's dragging on. A lot of people are dying. And when they say goodbye to their loved ones, they're not seeing those people come back, but they're also not seeing a lot of progress made. Although I do think what Trump did with Zelensky in the White House, with all of that very rude rhetoric and all of that horrific conversation that played out, I think that lit a fire amongst a lot of Ukrainians to say, actually, we're all in, we're going to keep on fighting this. It almost, I think, unified them.
Did you get to meet Zelensky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty surreal. It was the last international it was our last trip that we did as a Europe Bureau before we moved home to New Zealand, and Newshub closed down, and we were at a peace summit in Switzerland, and he was there speaking because it was all about getting peace in Ukraine, and then we essentially bumped into him, and we were with the Police Minister Mark Mitchell, and he very helpfully kind of intervened and got him to stay there in front of our camera so we could talk to him for a bit. But it was pure luck, and it was the perfect final
to end your European journey. You're back now in Auckland. How's that transition been from being out on the front line and then coming back into Aotearoa, where we're a peaceful nation?
Yeah.
I mean, did that transition? Did it take some time to just to adjust? That with being able to sleep finally and not get woken up with sirens.
The sleep is a funny one. I think I probably didn't realise how tired I was, from all of that crazy schedule. I said to someone the other day, I haven't cried all year. It's so weird. I haven't cried. I used to cry all the time. Then I was like, well, I was only crying because I was running on like 1.5 hours sleep. I was so emotionally unstable. But no, it's been good. It's been nice to see friends and family again and actually catch up and have those relationships kind of a bit restored. I think the adjustment is an ongoing thing. I've had a horrible week because I just want to be in Israel, and those days suck, really suck. But there's also, amazing things to being home, and I feel I've got such a unique perspective. I know we all say we're lucky to be in New Zealand, but I feel like I do have a very special perspective on that. Like, I just do feel so immensely lucky to call New Zealand home, and I love this country, so I'm happy in a lot of ways to be back here.
Most of our listeners are people who work in public relations. They're comms professionals. Now that you're back in the newsroom, do you get people like me calling you up and pitching stories, or you're seeing press releases come through? I'm kind of interested to understand from your perspective what makes a good pitch from a PR.
Yeah, I think we obviously, every journalist in a newsroom is getting constant bombardments, I would say, from various different people. I think for me, if it's targeted and personal, then it's always going to stand out. Like, I get so many emails in a day, and you can tell instantly which ones are kind of generic or even just something. I mean, most journalists have pretty clear rounds or passions or interests or topics that they're regularly reporting on. So if someone sends me a pitch at the moment and it's around anything to do with conflict or war or Ukraine or Gaza or any sort of big international story, or New Zealand's defence or our security or anything like that, then I'm obviously going to read it because that's my area of focus when it comes to my journalism. If it's something bizarre, like about the big boys' toys, what do you call it, that festival fair or whatever that happens down.
Yeah.
I'm just going to delete it straight away. Or something that I never report on. It's just not going to even cross my mind to barely even open that email. If it's like clearly a different font, different sized font of my name at the top of the whole press release, delete. If it's like just hi again, then it's copied and pasted. Like, you can just tell. Like, it's crazy how many emails you get where the formatting gives it away, that it's just gone out to a million people.
Just a generic.
Totally.
Yeah, like, yeah. What? So I guess the key you're looking for something that is going to be that you're interested in report. So PRs need to understand
what journalists focus on. Even if it's like, hey, Lisette, I know this isn't really up your alley, but I reckon it could be something for you. Like, that will even just make me think, oh, okay, they get that this is a bit of a weird ask for me to be covering this, but maybe I'll do it, or maybe I know someone else in the newsroom who would want to do it. Because a lot of people don't have all of the contacts of the people they need. So it's like, fine if it's, oh, this might not be something for you, but I reckon 3 News should cover it, or it could be good for 3 News. If you can put me in touch with someone, then I'd read that. So
what would be the sort of the key ingredients for someone to pitch to you? What are the key elements? Keeping it brief.
Oh yeah, sometimes they're like pages and pages, and it's crazy. Like, what is the story? Like, what is it? And when is it? And like, also the other thing is in television, we obviously need something visual. So it's like, if there's nothing interesting to film, it's going to be a really hard sell. So kind of trying to make sure that there's something obvious in the pitch that would make it a compelling visual story as well. You know, like a lot of times you'll get, for example, I'll get something from World Vision or Tear Fund or whatever, and they'll, because I've got really good relationships with them, but they'll say straight away, oh, and we have lots of footage of this from the refugee camp that we can get to you, or we can get that person in Sudan to film on their way to work that day. So you're like, okay, so even though this story is happening on the other side of the world, I know there's going to be lots of pictures that will help tell the story, because we need a full 2 minutes of television.
So I guess people, instead of thinking what's good for the client, they've actually got to go and think, right, what's good for the client, but also what makes this a bigger story in terms of imagery, the who's available to be interviewed, are they a good talker? And I guess there's a human interest element as well.
Yeah, because if the story is on like a knife's edge, if we're like, could or could not do it, like it's not a must-have, it's a nice-to-have. But then there's another line in the email that's like, oh, and by the way, she's got the most amazing footage of a bomb going off next to her accommodation in Gaza. Then I'm thinking, okay, that's a must-do story, because this woman was in her accommodation in Gaza and a bomb went off. That's crazy. We definitely need to tell that story. But if I don't know that, I'm just thinking, oh, it's another person. We've kind of heard from a lot of that lately. With this, maybe don't have time. I've got this other story I'm working on. You know, like trying to give a couple more bits that are going to make someone sit up and say, that's a must-have, not a nice-to-have.
And do you prefer exclusives?
Yeah, I think every journalist would prefer exclusives.
If you had one piece of advice for PR professionals about working better with journalists, what would that be?
Yeah, I don't know. I think probably that personal pitch is a good one. I think like if someone doesn't reply, like sometimes you get just hounded, you know, and it might be for a story a month away. Like a lot of the time journalists are working on like a 12-hour 3-hour deadline, 2-hour deadline. Like sometimes I've only got capacity. Our days the day turnaround is busy. So if someone hasn't replied to you that day or that week, even if you're talking about something a month away, like that's not panic stations. Like stop calling them because they're just going to get annoyed at the constant phone calls or the constant follow-up emails, or, you know, I think just be mindful of, and don't ring at 5 p.m. or 10 to 6.
When is a good time to contact a journalist?
I reckon in the mornings,
First thing in the morning.
Yeah, like 10. Usually at 9 we get in, we find out our story of the day, then we're kind of letting things percolate a little bit, make sure we can get our heads around what our story is for the day. So like I think 10 is probably a nice time to catch people. We're feeling positive at 10. We're like, yeah, nothing's
You've had your coffee.
Yeah, we've had a coffee. The day's still fresh. Nothing's gone terribly wrong. Everything's on track and calm. Yeah, I'll answer the phone at 10. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I guess the further you call a journalist in the day, closer to
people call it like 5 p.m. I'm like, no. Yeah. You're crazy. It's so crazy.
I want to talk about artificial intelligence, AI, because we hear about it every single day. Some people think it's a force for good. Others are really, really skeptical. Yeah. There was a recent podcast, The Diary of a CEO, and he interviews a guy who has worked for Google, created their AI, and is quite terrified of what potentially is going to happen. But just bringing it back to PRs, I mean, are you noticing more AI generated content, and is AI being, or as a tool, is that being used in newsrooms now?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously newsrooms like everywhere around the world are just like working out what is, where does AI fit, where can it be really helpful, because obviously it is a super powerful tool, and I think it's really, in a lot of times, a lot of cases rather, it's really time effective. So it just helps you get through all of the work you've got to do, and try and minimise some of those more arduous tasks, whether it's writing, kind of we have to write letters a lot of the time for accreditation purposes that are just very generic, but they still need to be written, and sometimes AI can do those a lot quicker just to file off a quick accreditation email or something like that, but not so much with the actual news or the storytelling. It's not being used in that way. I think AI for us also is changing the way we have to verify things and making that a real minefield. We used to obviously be aware of where we were getting footage from, and you'd see if in breaking news situations and earthquakes or whatever, you'd see a lot of Twitter video and you'd take a lot of that video and use it. Now we're having to be really, really careful about where that footage comes from, because a lot of it is AI generated and it looks really real. And so that's, I guess, almost slowing us down a lot, because we're a lot more cautious. And I had a story recently, I can't even remember what it was. I think it might have been, it was one of the conflicts this year, and I had the whole story done, and I thought there was this footage that we had in the story that I thought was real, and then the more I looked at it, I just started feeling really sick, and it was actually just like a gut feeling of that I don't think that's real footage, like it just didn't. And I took it out at the story was completely edited, and then I just watched it and I just was, I just don't think that's real, and we took it out, and I was so grateful. It definitely wasn't real in the end, but it was just a gut feeling that I just said, we shouldn't be putting that to air. That's not verified properly. I don't think that's right. But it was everywhere online. And yeah, I think I think if the newsrooms are a lot more cautious now, we're very scared of getting it right. You
can't just use your gut instinct.
No, you can't.
Because I've seen content which I think this is like, it's totally, it looks so realistic.
Totally.
So are you using technology to basically to check if...
Well, I think that's where it's heading. Yeah. Like, we don't have that technology in the newsroom right now. So unless it's come from a verified source these days, we just won't touch it. So it has to come from, a reputable AP or Reuters. We rely a lot on seeing, that they're verified. At BBC has a very big team of verification
who
that are using,
who go through it very, very
as a whole team and placing it with landmarks and using landmarks to verify where that's happened, and then checking in real life what's happened with that landmark, if it's been hit or whatever. That's in conflict specific. But we're having to be talking to the person who took the video, contacting the person, having a conversation about where that flooding video has come from. What is, if it's in New Zealand, that's a lot easier to do. But yeah, that is all becoming so strict and probably more time consuming, but so necessary now because the internet is just flooded. Even like Truth Social posts from Donald Trump, sometimes we've seen stuff and thought, oh my God, he's posted this, but it's just a completely... I mean, that's very easy to verify because you just go to the actual Truth Social and you can see. But that sort of stuff in the rush of news, and especially if you're like on air and you're updating a program live, it's so easy to get excited about something and think, wow, we've got to get that on air. But now I think everybody is very aware that you have to stop and be a lot more careful about what you're seeing.
Lisette, thank you. I really have enjoyed our discussion today. Your stories, honesty, and insights are an incredible way for us to launch this podcast. If you haven't read Lisette's book, go out and buy it. I promise you won't be disappointed. It's an amazing read. To our listeners, that's the first episode of It's All About the Comms, brought to you by the Public Relations Institute of New Zealand. So don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on the PRINZ website so you never miss an episode. And a big thank you to our sponsor, Crescendo Studios. I'm Paul Patton. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for more conversations from the world of PR and comms. Mā te wā.